Morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. My name is Andrea Keefe, the Meetings and Events Coordinator with IPC. I'm very excited to kick off today's webinar on component shortage, update, and outlook. It's important to note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you via email a few business days concluding this webinar. We will not be doing a live Q&A after the webinar. If you have any questions regarding today's webinar, we will send you the speaker's email address to reach out directly. Today, I am pleased to welcome Jeff Ray to be our featured speaker. Jeff is Vice President, Product and Supplier Marketing, Passives and Discrete Semiconductors at TTI. So Jeff, thank you so much for being here. I'll now turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you. So get started on the component shortage webinar. I'd like to first talk about what we'll cover. We'll cover some of the causal factors that's led to the shortages. I also like to discuss the product life cycles, primarily focused on MLCCs and resistor chips, which, while they're not the CPUs and microprocessors of the industry, they are very relevant to the overall productions, and significant issues have resulted in the lack of availability of either resistors or MLCCs in line down situations for manufacturers and delaying product lead times. We'll also talk about product availability. I'd like to address the raw material impacts, and that may be able to give you some insight into future pricing, and then some final thoughts before we conclude. And again, any questions that you have, if you please email me, I'll be glad to respond to them as soon as I can. So first, let's talk about the causal factors. Many of the vertical markets, in fact, all the vertical markets we participate in today, primarily a strong automotive, industrial, and telecom. In addition to that, we're also seeing strong market share gains in the military sector, although that's less impactful for the MLCC and resistor markets. But we are seeing dramatic increases, largely driven by all vertical market segments being up simultaneously. And then the addition of technology that's being implemented into automotive and data applications that's identified here in automotive, whether it be in powertrain, safety and infotainment, comfort, body electronics, and then telematics. The graph on the bottom left will start with an internal combustion engine, an ICE, pure ICE, and give you a scale of 1, where there's 1 MLCC per internal combustion engine output. As you move through the scale, whether it be hybrid EVs or full-blown EVs, micro HEVs, you can see the additive content per unit. Now, these going into the mid-year of 2018, these were real concerns, and we'll talk about later as the manifestation of this migration from internal combustion engines to HEV or pure EV applications has been slowed, largely driven by consumer adoption, charging stations, and then some tariff impacts on lithium ion, which is really critical to the battery consumption for those markets. In data, smartphones, mobile internet, and 5G, certainly large drivers of the MLCC consumption. You can see on the bottom right-hand chart from low-end cell phones through mid-high-end, the iPhone 6, iPhone 7, and then the iPhone 10, as the number of units, in some cases, double to triple per handset. Now, arguably, the rollouts of some of the handsets into the global market have been less than stellar, but it's still super impactful as the functionality of these components can tend to consume more and more MLCCs and resistors as well, but super impactful to the MLCC market. So we look at our next slide. We'll start to talk about what happened from a manufacturer's standpoint. So what we've showing here is some of these volumes here. So this is in the billions of dollars and trillions of units. So when you look at the MLCC output, particularly in the highlighted area from fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 2016, while the number of units increased 25 to 35% in that same period of time, revenue remained flat. And what that caused is several leading MLCC manufacturers to adjust their strategies to serving this market. So there was literally no return on investment and logically no reason to continue to add manufacturing capacity to address a market where there's no returns. So the first footnote here is I'd like to dispel any beliefs that there's a calm in the market right now that is the first indicator that the market will start to slow down and the MLCC situation will resolve itself in the first half of 2019. In fact, I would suggest that the MLCC constrained and allocated market conditions will exist all the way through 2019. But I do have some data that would suggest that maybe the more difficult time in resistor chips is starting to get behind us. So market demands are growing, capacity is growing at a slower rate, and it's yielding a situation where leading suppliers have made a decision to exit or end-of-life obsolete products. It's estimated that 40% of the global production of roughly 4 trillion units in 2019 has been taken offline, and other manufacturers that are starting to move into this space, particularly in the smaller case size, high CV markets, are struggling to keep up with the current demands. And we'll show you later by case size and capacitance where some real concerned areas exist today, and again, I believe will exist all the way through 2019. The next thing we'd like to take a look at is some of the product life cycles for resistor chips and MLCCs. As we look at that, and I've put these charts next to each other on purpose, so you can see between 1996 and projected 2020, the roadmaps for resistor chips and MLCCs by case size. As you start to see the 0402, the 0603 on the left chart, in the pink line on 0402s and the red line on 0603s, you can really start to see where the 0603s peaked in 2000, 0402s peaked somewhere around 2011 or 2012, and the 0201 and the 01005 will start to replace those case sizes as the more common case sizes in the global market. You look at the chart on the right, this is for MLCCs. Again, the reason I put these two next to each other, albeit at some point they are not similar from their function, but very similar from their life cycles, as you can see, where 0402 started to peak out in about 2011 on resistor chips. In a similar time frame, slightly earlier in MLCCs, 0402 started to crest and it started to trend down. 0201s and 01005s have started to replace those case sizes in MLCCs, and you can see similar lines on the 0805 and 0603s, where they really peaked out prior to 2000 and 0805s and around 2000 and 0603s. Not sure how many people on the call today will start to feel old when now an 0402 is considered a legacy large case size component, but it didn't make me too happy when I put this chart together. Part of the issues is in North America, particularly in the industrial, military, and transportation vertical segments, there are large consumers of the 0402, 0603, 0805, 1206, and even larger case size resistor chips and MLCC capacitor chips. So this becomes a real issue relative to the dichotomy of the North American market as opposed to the global market. We'll talk a little bit later on as the slowdown or this calm that many consumers feel that's happening out there in the MLCC market, and as that production and available capacity comes online, primarily out of the China market, how non-applicable 0201 and smaller case size MLCCs are to the gaps in the North American market, as many of the applications are at 0603 or larger. Next, we'll talk about product availability. First chart I'd like to show you is specific to MLCCs and the effects of their decision to cease production. The market leaders, based on profitability and the volumetric efficiency that was gained by moving from larger case sizes, as an example 1206, to an 0402, the yield rate goes up 80 times over. So the same amount of material that goes into a slurry and then starts to form the layers of the MLCC itself. If a customer is able, from a voltage standpoint and a capacitance standpoint, to move from a 1206 to an 0402, the yield rate for the manufacturer goes up 80 times. If they are able to go to an 0201, it goes up 3,200 times. So you can see why many of the market-leading manufacturers, given the fact that there was limited return on investment and such prolific gains in productivity by moving to smaller case sizes, when the same voltage and capacitance was available, started to migrate away from the lower CV, so less than 1 microfarad, and smaller case size, larger case size, or above 0402. These are the primary affected areas. And so what we're going to show in this chart is hard allocation. So when you look in the particularly 103s or 104s that are grouped together here, the red areas, 0402s, 0603s, and 0805s for the North American market have been particularly hard hit, as that these are products that are equally used globally as well as in North America, and that low CV, larger case size product has been extremely impacted. We have, at TTI, have adjusted our strategy to support that market and feel that we have a good platform going forward and will be able to maintain productions, but there will be shortages throughout 2019, particularly in the 0402 through 0805 low CV areas that will be very pronounced. When we look in the orangish squares here, you start to see where they're starting to become a little bit of product that is what we would consider now just constrained. And for us, a constrained product is one that's extremely long lead times, but we're getting firm order acknowledgments from our suppliers. We are less opportunistic with that available inventory, and pretty much are only supplying existing customers with those products, but we are starting to see other suppliers move into this space that was voided by the market leaders and start to bring on production in the first half of 2019. It will increase, so you will start to see that those orange squares starting to broaden out, particularly in the more toward the higher CV areas of 1 microfarad and higher. But it will take at least through the first half for that to start to take effect. And in those areas, I would anticipate that there will still be in the constrained situation all the way through 2019, but particularly for the first half of 2019. What we're showing in caution, and the fundamental difference is that all of these squares do not represent the same amount of volumes. One of the main reasons for the red squares is that roughly 40% of the overall North American market that goes through distribution is represented in those squares. So all squares aren't the same values, and the yellow squares, albeit that they are in larger case sizes and tend to be in lower CV applications, they also tend to be less high volume or multiple customers in high volume situations. The overall risk to people's supply chain is actually a little bit mitigated by the lower volumes. And then consequently, so what we would like to say is that that product is available, and without being cute, I would like to say it is comparatively available versus reasonably available. And so as compared to where it was, it is now more available, and it is our hopes and beliefs that of the online production capabilities from the suppliers that we interact with, that those squares will be moving from yellow to green to become truly available. And then where the squares are green through the 01, 005s, 0201s, and the lower CVs, and then in the larger case sizes in the high CVs, again, above 1 microfarad, that is where all of the available manufacturing capabilities from the market leading suppliers have continued to put their efforts into those spaces, and you will continue to see more and more product become available for those spaces. Customers particularly hard hit are in industrial applications based on the thickness of their PC board. It is very difficult for customers to move into smaller case sizes because of the thickness of their PC boards. So it will take a concerted effort to migrate existing customers to smaller packages, but would also ask all of our listeners, as well as your customers, to evaluate if you can take a higher voltage part, if you can receive a tighter tolerance part. Is an AEC-Q qualified or an automotive part? Is it a must, or is it an option? Is flexible termination required? These are the types of MLCCs that are particularly hard hit, and in many of our customer situations that we've discussed with them, in some cases, these features or benefits are more optional than actually required. Other options are to move to smaller packages, or then, of course, if those are not options, then redesigns may be alternatives. And we can talk about later on in the presentation where a polymer tantalum or aluminum or film products may actually be an option going forward. But again, it will require a redesign. Let's talk about resistor chips. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I feel that the resistor chip business has really started to solidify, and the worst part of the allocation on resistor chips is behind us. We're looking at thin film, whether it be nichrome or nitride. Lead times now in the nichrome area are about 12 to 20 weeks. In Q1 of 2018, these productions were actually in the 40 to 50 week range. When you look at nichrome, it's been very stable for most part of 2018, but it is at a higher lead time in about the 20 to 25 week lead time, but very, very stable, and don't project any issues going into 2019 in the thin film area, regardless whether it's nichrome or nitride. In current sense, again, a very popular product, particularly in battery applications, lead times have reduced into a more normal range in thick film in the 16 to 20 weeks, but there are exceptions, particularly again in large case sizes or anti-sulfur products where lead times are still really plus 30 weeks. Lead times in this product category, even in Q1 of 2018, were at plus 50 weeks. current sense resistors in metal strip, which is a very popular type of current sense resistor. Lead times are still plus 50 weeks. There are additional manufacturing capacities coming online. In this case, it is in Mexico, and I wanted to highlight that so there'll be no tariff impact, and it will contribute to lower lead times, but it will only be really happening more in the first half of 2019. So the lagger in the resistor area is really metal strip current sense resistors. Next topic I'd like to talk to you about is the raw material impact. And so when we look at the resistor raw materials, what I've inserted here is a chart, and this chart will give you an indication based upon the type of metals as what is the overall raw material impact based upon that. You'll notice that in lead that there's some asterisks there, and that's really only highlighting for kind of military applications, so I'm going to exclude that from this conversation, but didn't want to ignore the fact that it is there with in bright red with two asterisks next to it. Talk quickly about palladium, though. Palladium is a rare earth metals, precious metals that we are seeing some issues with. So there's a chart at the top that starts to indicate the rise of palladium, and this will be significant from a cost standpoint in 2019, as base metal prices have really over the last 4 months have started to really reflect, have been coming down. Mostly this is reflecting the Chinese authorities' efforts to shore up economic growth. Base price metals rose about 1.7% over the previous 4 months in October. And we think that this is a lot of the developments from China, which consumes nearly half of all global base metals. They continue to lead in the evolution of base metal prices in October. The overall news that China will spur their infrastructure investment in order to cushion the economy against any negative effects of the trade war with the United States actually is going to be impactful to base metal prices in the back half of Q4 as well as in the first half of 2019. China officials on the Purchasing Manufacturers Index, or PMI, is actually continuing to inch down even though base metal prices have continued to drop and the infrastructure investment, which would suggest that based upon the market experts that we deal with, that the overall health of the China economy will be impactful, and since it is losing steam, it will not bode well for future metals pricing, and we're anticipating an increase of 3.8% year on year in 2019 over 18 in base metal prices. It's going to be super impactful to the raw material impact for MLCCs and resistor chips. Other areas that are impactful to resistors, so the ceramic substrate, which has increased over 30% year on year, is about also 30% of the overall raw material cost of a resistor chip. We've talked about a little bit about palladium, and it's up 20% in 2018, and you have a chart at the top that takes you through the past year. And then there's another rare earth metal, so ruthenium, and ruthenium is really critical to the manufacturing of resistor chips, and it's up 275% since February of 2017. So super impactful to the overall resistor pricing. So availability is becoming more stable, but our concern is that we will continue to see cost increase based upon the base metals that go into it. And when you look at the average sale price of a resistor chip, it's extremely low. And so other items such as corrugated paper and even ink, which goes into the packaging, and in many cases the packaging of the resistors is more expensive than the resistors itself, but packaging and corrugated paper is going to be impactful to the overall cost for the resistors in 2019. So I would say availability better, but maybe pricing at best would be flat, but likely you will see increases due to raw materials. When we look at the overall capacitor business, so it's not just specific to ceramic capacitors or MLCCs, you start to see whether it's ceramic, tantalum, or aluminum, similar chart based upon the content. And we'd like to highlight, obviously there's a huge amount of aluminum that goes into aluminum capacitors. Pricing has stayed fairly stable there. You can also see nickel. You can see the copper pricing. And so what I want to communicate here is back to the prediction as earlier of a 3.8% price increase. Although we have seen a decrease in raw materials fundamentally throughout 2018, we would suggest that the cost component of MLCCs and resistor trips based upon these base metals will increase somewhere in the 3.8% range in 2019. So we'll start to see an increase. Other product categories that are extremely impactful, one of the options for many customers as they move away from MLCCs is to move to polymer tantalum. Polymer tantalum has got some huge advantages to MLCCs, particularly in high-speed applications. But one of the challenges is that about 70% of a tantalum capacitor is made up of tantalite, whether it's in the base dielectric or in the wires, attachment wires. There's a huge amount of direct connectivity of tantalite to in the overall manufacturing of a tantalum capacitor. So I've got two charts in here to show you where we are and with tantalite. And tantalite is now approaching $200 per kilogram. And the chart on the right gives you a historic look at tantalum. And as many of you may remember, the crisis in 2011, where tantalum and tantalite became very scarce and very problematic for many manufacturers and consumers of products. And you can see where it shot up in 2011 at historic highs in 2012, and then started to come down somewhere just north of $100 per kilogram. And over the last 18 months, you can see the increase in tantalite is increased almost 50%, or almost halfway back to the record highs of 2012. So I would be concerned about the overall pricing and cost associated with tantalum capacitors as well. Lead times on polymer tantalum have gone out to plus 35 weeks, which is about 2x the normal lead time in polymer tantalum. Some of that is because the A-case tantalum is an exact drop-in replacement for a 1206 from a form standpoint. It is the exact drop-in from a 1206 MLCC, but there is some functionality and performance differences. Many customers have migrated from MLCCs to A-case polymer tantalum, which is, again, attributing to the lead time extension to polymer tantalum, and then the tantalite consumption is obviously driving the cost up. I would like to also indicate that direct materials, whether it be bonding wires, particularly in wire wound resistors or in inductors, lead frames is becoming a real issue. We are starting to see lots of increases and delays, more importantly, delays in the lead time of lead wires, lead frames, and bonding wires, which is affecting the delivery of inductors as well as resistors. And that will be impactful for us going forward in 2019. One option, particularly in the magnetics area, is if wire wound inductors for lead frame issues or wire issues, that you will see customers starting to move either to a pressed iron ore inductor or to a ferrite-based inductor, which are less impacted by the overall lead frame constructions of a wire round. There is a website that is contained here, back to TTI, where all material prices are contained, as well as some market indicators on our Market Eye site. And I would encourage you to use that site to be able to track any of the metals going forward. So what I'd like to do is share off some final thoughts relative to the overall presentation today. We didn't spend a lot of time, in fact, very, very little time on tariff. Many of the suppliers that we deal with on the MLCC and resistor areas, if they did manufacture in China, they have moved large production manufacturing out of China to other facilities. It could be moved back to Taiwan in some cases. It could be to, we have some that are in Israel. We certainly have some that are in Mexico, in Malaysia, and various other locations. So, albeit that there will be some tariff impacts to the overall market in 2019, I believe that the impacts will be more of from a headwind standpoint on the MLCC market, meaning that the MLCCs go into finished goods. Anywhere from televisions to white goods are going to be affected by the tariff, not necessarily from at the component level, but at the consumption level, as that they do go into handheld, ultra-portable, consumer-type products that are heavily manufactured in China. And as those products become less cost competitive and the features and benefits aren't really as a big a differentiating factor, we're seeing sales of those products reduced. That's why I mentioned earlier that there are some, particularly 01005s, some 0201 MLCCs becoming more available. But the issue there is that those are not necessarily the popular case sizes in the North American market. And while it is giving some customers a false read that they think that the MLCC shortage is starting to resolve itself, and I'm here to tell you that it is not. It is absolutely going to continue through 2019, and the available inventory that is now is more driven by the brokers market in China with large order cancellations on the manufacturers. But again, those are not necessarily the components that are going into the industrial, transportation, and military markets in North America and the 0603 and larger case size products. On resistors, I believe the worst is behind us. Do be mindful in the metal strip current sense area that there are still extended lead times. One of the differences in the resistor market as opposed to the capacitor market is that the resistor manufacturers, while they were slow to add capacity, none of the resistor manufacturers truly exited the business. And so the lag is because was driven by the slowness for by the suppliers to react, to add the capacity, and then the issues they ran into actually getting the manufacturing equipment to add to the production lines itself. In MLCCs, again, don't be fooled by what appears to be a calm. It is not over. It is going to continue through 2018. If you have the ability to migrate to higher voltage products, tighter tolerance products, automotive products, or non-flexible termination products, I believe that's your first option. You'll also have the ability to go smaller case sizes. Will the pad layout for your application accommodate an 0402 or smaller product? And if not, I think you may be looking at some options that it could include redesigns, whether that be with surface mount aluminum electrolytics, aluminum polymer, or polymer tantalum products to meet your production needs for 2019 and beyond. Again, I'm available for any questions that you might have. I'll be glad to email them, and I'll respond to your emails as quickly as possible. Thank you for your time today. Goodbye.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone who attended today. And as Jeff mentioned, we will be sending you his email address with the recording so you can reach out to him directly. Thank you.